All right, everyone, welcome back from the break. I am very excited to introduce our second speaker for the day, Dr. Ken Ueno. Dr. Ueno is a professor of music here at Berkeley. He earned a Bachelor of Music in Film Scoring and Composition from Berkeley College of Music in Boston. He then received a Master of Musical Arts from Yale School of Music and a Ph.D. from Harvard University. Dr. Ueno is a composer, vocalist, improviser, and sound artist. His work explores unique musical personalities, creating person-specific music that challenges traditional paradigms and pushes the boundaries of perception. His compositions have been performed globally, including the Lincoln Center, the Kennedy Center, Queen Elizabeth Hall in England, and the Vienna Concert House, and many others. Dr. Ueno has received numerous awards, including recognition from the American Academy in Rome, the American Academy in Berlin, and multiple grants and fellowships from institutions such as the Fromm Music Foundation, New Music USA, and the National Endowment for the Arts. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Ken Ueno.
Thank you. Thanks. It's a great honor to be talking to you today. I'd like to thank the Chancellor for inviting me, and Oliver O'Reilly, the Vice Provost for Undergrad Education, and Tessa Scott for helping to organize our talks. I would like to start by playing a short video. Breath is at the ontological center of my art practice as a vocalist, and taking a cue from the poet and Berkeley colleague Robert Haas's thesis that poetry is a physical structure of the actual breath of a given emotion. My practice transposes this notion into music through physical valence. I believe that physical gestures are, indeed, mapped to given emotions. When we hear the operatic tenor Pavarotti sing a high C and linger there for tens of seconds, he not only suspends his breath, but we too, as listeners, suspend our breath. Physiovalence directs our bodies to vivify in real time the suspension of our breath in parallel with the music to which we are attending. In my music, through circular breathing, that Pavarottian lingering moment is expanded to minutes, not seconds. The phenomenological reading of that expanded lingering exacerbates traditional modes of analysis in terms of structural hearing. For example, in Tard, the video of which we just watched, I hold my breath in a bowl of water for 2 minutes as an analog to how I have felt my breath has been suspended since November 2016, as well as how I feel my voice as a person of color has been muted. My piece foregrounds my body as a specific instrument. Much of my music is person-specific, wherein the intricacies of performance practice are brought into focus in the technical achievements of a specific individual, fused inextricably with that performer's aura. In an era in which we are increasingly rendered anonymous through digitization, person specificity stands against the normative business practice of neo-colonial transportability in classical music and says, no, you cannot replace people who look like me. What I call physiovalence is the sympathetic resonance in alignment with broadcast viscerality in performance as received and acted upon the audience. To operate, a work needs to be given an appropriate temporality of engagement with the audience, long enough that the physical state, and by extension the mental state of the audience, might empathically align with the artwork's intent. As a footnote, when I was thinking about what to call it, I thought of another UC Berkeley colleague, Stephen Palmer, and Karen Schloss's research on the ecological valence theory of human color preference, wherein the grounding paradigm of nature sets the condition of our color preferences. Palmer and Schloss say, for example, blues and cyans may be universally liked because clear sky and clean water are universally appealing, and browns and olives may be universally disliked because feces and rotting food are universally disgusting. So valence is a resonance, the operational prima voce grounding paradigm that contextualizes a relation. In physiovalence, the history of our relationship to our own bodies conditions our capacity for empathy. When we experience a person holding their breath, having previously rehearsed the physical stress of holding our own breath, in our own personal histories, we know how that feels, and we can feel it because we can recall it. If one does not consider the voice an instrument, then the megaphone is my main instrument. I started using the megaphone when I started performing in large spaces with complex architectural features, which afforded the possibility of a counterpoint of resonances. Armed with a megaphone, I am mobile and I can incorporate the narrative possibility of movement in a space, direct my sound in different directions at different structural materials and angles. I can play with various lengths of echoes and articulating the resonant frequencies of different locations in a space means that architecture, too, can be read as harmonic structure. I've developed an arsenal of vocal techniques specific to the megaphone. For example, a kind of slap tongue whose attack is followed by a multiphonic drone shaped by changing the vowel shapes within my mouth, but the shapes are vowels that don't exist in any language. I've also learned to control the bandwidth of the multiphonic with the shape of my mouth, and I can also sing in counterpoint or in augmentation with a shaped feedback multiphonic by humming into my nasal cavity. There are other techniques which involve ingressive singing, which in alteration with exhale techniques allows me to circular breathe. I am patient zero of my practice. But the normative modality for vocal pedagogy in the United States presents the historical mannerisms of the vocal tradition of Western Europe as normal technique. In his seminal article, Improvisation After 1950, George Lewis illuminates how the process of ex-nomination impacted notions of improvisative musical practices in Western art music in the post-war era. Citing the media critic John Fiske, Lewis reminds us that ex-nomination is the means by which whiteness avoids being named and thus keeps itself out of the field of interrogation and therefore off the agenda for change. Ex-nomination also operates in music pedagogy in the United States in institutions of higher learning where the values of Western classical music are so entrenched that those musical values are asserted, unchallenged, as universal norms for music and invisible ground. A particularly excessive sub-area is in the training of the voice, where the particularities of the performance practice of Western opera continues to be promulgated as the standard. The consequences are many: a reinforcement of neo-colonial hierarchies and musical values, the muting of non-Western sonic accents and traditions and bodies, as well as the potential harm to the body and psyche of the student singer. The physical molding or neo-colonial domestication of a non-Western singer's body into an instrument for bel canto singing is an example of what I call corseting. The most person-specific piece I have composed to date is my vocal concerto, written for myself to perform. When I talk about person-specific works, I divide it into two aspects, the material and the poetics. I will now first focus on the material aspects of person specificity and then turn to the poetics. In the initial stage of my process, I spectrally analyze sounds I make with my voice. I will demonstrate some of these more unusual sounds, like subtones. Throat singing. Overtone singing. Here's an analysis, a spectrographic analysis of overtone singing. The darkest line at the bottom represents the fundamental frequency. As I transform the shape of my palette, changing vowels, I'm essentially altering the filtering of the fundamental, which results in the articulation of different upper partials, which you can see with the karst up above. Now, this is an example of multi-band multiphonic singing as opposed to the analysis of overtone singing. The most present amplitude is the darkest line in the middle. Okay, so this is more than 2 notes. So the most present amplitude is in the middle, and there are side bands, right? So this is ring modulation in my face. I convert the analyzed frequency components of my vocalizations into pitches, often expressed as microtones, which then I orchestrate. Okay, having discussed some of the material aspects that go into the design of my person-specific works, I'll now give an example of what I mean by poetics. About a year before the premiere of my viola concerto, Daedalus, my friend Wendy Richmond, for whom I was composing the piece, sent me this X-ray. She had fallen off a stage during a rehearsal and broke her ankle. The dark mound over there that dominates the bottom area is the talus bone, from which I took the title of my piece. Having spent years working with spectral analyses of sound, when I saw the bolts here in her ankle, I thought, oh, these are chords. And I analyzed a few points. I see the red vertical lines, and I transposed those frequency ratios to a range that the string orchestra could play to test them out if I liked it. Some of these chords sounded nice, and they're in the piece. The person-specific gambit in this piece is, if you were to experience this piece with Wendy Richmond standing in front of you, knowing that as she is standing in front of you, she still has these metal bolts in her ankles, the analysis of which inspired some harmonies in the piece, then you would feel a different sense of authenticity than hearing anyone else play it. In preparing for this lecture, I was asked to respond to some queries. The first of this was, what was your first encounter with the ideas, I put it in sounds, that became the focus of your career? I am often asked how I came to sing multiphonics. I have two narratives, two vectors of time, one linear and one more complex. When I was in my 20s and attending conservatories, I discovered Tuvan throat singing, and I was blown away. I thought I could do it. I wanted to do it. So I practiced, often singing in the shower or in the car on commutes, contexts in which the acoustics were optimal, as well as the privacy I was afforded in devoting myself to such an esoteric ritual. And I taught myself to do it, and eventually I started performing. Then, for about a decade, I led a double life composing for classically trained musicians, chamber works and orchestral works, and performing in parallel. As an improviser, experimental musician, a habitus that intersects with what is now called sound art. Eventually, I received an opportunity to bring these two practices together, a commission for concerto for myself and orchestra. It's a picture from that. Around the time I started to work on this piece, I rediscovered these cassette tapes I made when I was 6. I made nonlinear musique concrète. I was also recording vocals. My adult self, listening to my 6-year-old self, was astonished to hear that I was singing multiphonics. This is the basis of my manifold history. One history, linearly unfolding, teleologically, discovering multiphonic singing in my 20s, being inspired by it and working with it to today. And the other, a vector of time reaching backwards to something I did naturally as a child, perhaps my essential self. Now, I think when I heard multiphonic singing in my 20s, I was subconsciously predisposed to it. As an aggregate, it's this non-teleological. Playing with this unique artifact of personal history at the beginning of my performances of my concerto, after coming on stage, being greeted by the conductor, I stand next to a boombox with a CDR with a recording of my 6-year-old self. You can see that here. There's a boombox here. And the first thing I do is I engage the CDR, and it starts to play sounds of my 6-year-old self, and then I sing with it live on top of it. This is auto-archaeology as an authenticizing gesture. This is part of the person-specific gambit in my piece. It would feel different if it were anybody else to sing along with my 6-year-old self. Here's a bit of the recording of my 6-year-old self.
Hachikon, Janet. Da-da-da-da.
And that's the multiphonic singing that I didn't even know was multiphonic singing, right? And this counterpoint with myself multiple decades apart was inspired by Samuel Beckett's Krapp's Last Tape, in which a tape device helps inflate a monologue into a multilogue. As this piece is person-specific to me, it occurred to me that the structure of the piece should also change as my body changes. See this shrine to the right here? This is the most holy site in Shinto. This is the Ise Jingu. It has been around for about a millennium, but it has been rebuilt every 20 years. The ontology of architecture, the idea of permanence, of materiality in time, contrasts with that with the West. My idea for my piece is that every 30 years, I will remake that opening tape part, mixing sounds I sang as a child and sounds I sing now at different iterations and sing on top of it live. My greatest musical ambition is to be able to do this at least 2 times. You young people are invited. Another thing I did for the poetics, investigating the poetics of person specificity, was do a Google vanity search, looking up my name, and this is what I found. I found another Ken Ueno, who's a computer scientist, and he wrote this article on a sufficient condition for the existence of most specific hypothesis in Progol, and deleting the last part in Progol off, I use it as the title of my piece. And now that I've been performing it and has been recorded, when I Google it, it comes up first. There can be only one. Right? What's it going to do? Sue me? I mean, it looks. Ken, Ueno, I hate that guy. This is another strategy to weave the poetics of person specificity in my piece, and I would like to posit that person specificity is actually intrinsic to most music we listen to, and the way you listen to music. Do you not have favorite artists? Are you fans of Taylor Swift, Beyonce, or Billie Eilish? Does it matter to you that you go to a concert to hear their music and it's actually them, or a cover band or impersonator? That's how I feel with Jimi Hendrix, my biggest hero. Though some of his songs are covers, when I hear him, I'm not tracking how faithful he is to the original, but rather I feel every song of his I hear is a portal through which I can engage with his aura as a fan. Part of my mission as a composer is to transpose person specificity into classical music. It is resistance against the transportability of performers in classical music. I make space for myself and people who look like me on the orchestral stage, people who do not look like Beethoven or Brahms. But it's not just about representation. Through Spivak, I learned that representation is not enough. It is not enough to merely have a certain percentage of composers, artists, and professors hired to align with the numbers that superficially match them in society. This is just the start. The real work is to create change in the system so that diverse people can access their own position as narrators. As Spivak says, my exercise may be called a scrupulous travesty in the interest of producing a counter-narrative that will make visible the foreclosure of the subject whose lack of access to the position of narrator is a condition of possibility of the consolidation of Kant's position. And why is this important to me? Let me tell you about how I became a composer. I didn't grow up playing piano or violin, and in fact, as I am talking to you today, this is Plan B. As many of you are freshmen, or if you are not, sometime during the last 4 years or 5 maybe, you had to consider what you might like to do for the rest of your life in making the hard choices in thinking about where to go to school, whether or not to come to Cal. Here's my story. I was born in New York, but when I was about 8 months old, my family moved to Japan. From there, we moved to Switzerland, where I attended the international school and I first began to learn to speak English. My teachers were British, so initially I spoke with a British accent. Later, when I settled with my family in Los Angeles, in the neighborhood I grew up there, I didn't look like anyone else. I didn't sound like anyone else. I certainly didn't sound the way they'd expected me to sound. And all the while, I was told I was supposed to be American. I didn't really know what that meant. Not having any mentors, my insecurity about being fully American felt like a personal deficiency that I needed to resolve. So like you, when it came time to think about what I would do with my life, I devised a dramatic plan to help me earn legitimacy as an American. My plan A was to go to West Point, serve my country, come back to California, and become a senator. That's what you do, right? That's how you prove you're an American. United Airlines let servicemen pre-board flights right after families with children under 2 before global service members, which is their top tier customer level. So I worked hard, excelled in academics, and was a track star, was a champion debater, founded a radio station and a chess club in high school, and I got a congressional nomination to attend West Point, and I got in. That's me, second from the right on the front, right there. I survived the hardest year of my life, still the hardest year of my life, knock on wood, the plebe year at West Point. And going into the second year, I thought I was on my way, plan A. Then I suffered an accident, a training accident, and I couldn't continue. So I had to leave and convalesce for 2 years back home with my mom. And that was the hardest period in my life. I had worked so hard to get to West Point, and surviving plebe year felt like a minor miracle. I was bereft. I didn't know what I would do with the rest of my life. I was 18. Thankfully, the year before I went off to West Point, I discovered Jimi Hendrix. Inspired by him, I started playing guitar, and 2 years later, during the period of the 2 years of my convalescence, all I was doing every day was going to physical therapy and playing guitar 8-9 hours a day, and eventually I started writing songs and playing in bands. When I was healthy enough to think about finishing my education, I somehow thought, maybe I could do this in music. I knew nothing at the time. I think I'd only even heard of Juilliard, but I knew I couldn't go there because I was playing metal. But I was beginning to get interested in jazz, and I did some more research, and I found out about another school, the other Berkeley, the Berkeley College of Music in Boston. And I decided to go there, and I redid my whole undergrad from scratch. And like every music student in the world, I took music history, which is actually the history of Western classical music. And we got to the 20th century, and I was blown away by hearing Bela Bartok's Fourth String Quartet, which, if you know it, it's very visceral. It's metal. It was music that my body understood, but there was also the allure of reverse engineering the score, which was like a complex puzzle or architecture, and that's how I became a composer. Okay. The next prompt of this lecture is, what does your research process look like? I'll take you through how I made one of my more recent pieces. Nowadays, my creative output includes compositions for instruments, performing myself, and also making installations, spaces that run either autonomously or are spaces for me and the ensemble to perform in. My most ambitious works integrate these three output modalities. So there's a piece called Daedalus Drones. I want to play a little video of it. If you go to my YouTube channel, you can see that. It's a 3D video, so you can kind of play around and see if you want. All right. So I made a labyrinth, a fence labyrinth, to house a hive of flying drones. right? It's a space that is instrumentalized. Okay, how did I make this? Okay. Well, first, I had a dream that I was performing on the rooftop of a Hong Kong building, surrounded by an armada of drones, choreographically coordinated over time. And then from there, I managed a team of designers, engineers, architects, and administrative staff to implement my vision. And then from those early visions, I developed an interior conceptualization of the installation, and it was around this time that I thought of the fence. The fence keeps the audience safe from the drones, but it's still porous to sounds. An important step was when we were able to partner with the Asia Society, which is a museum in Hong Kong, as the venue. And here is my design for the installation of the labyrinth within the Chantal Miller Gallery there. The red lines, can you see these lines here? Like that, right? Those are the labyrinth, layout of the labyrinth fence. The green lines are the positions of the custom speakers that are moving on rails. And the stars show the increasing narrativity of the immersivity of the drones as the audience moves from left to right, from gallery 1 to gallery 4. And here are other further renderings of elevations that further refine the design. This is the final floor plan. This is the fabrication of the labyrinth in Beijing. And this is as it was installed in the space. There was an outdoor portion, a first movement, if you will, for 8 percussionists. Those are the that I placed outside on the footbridge. They're in the red and blue circles. And the audience is led by docents gradually up the hill to the labyrinth later. All right. Now, since the first portion is played outside, the percussion prelude starts with big swaths of silence which cut between percussive hits. I wanted to orchestrate epiphenomena, the cityscape. Hong Kong as a city, sounds become orchestrated into the piece, and then also the cicada. And then gradually the percussion takes over. And then we arrive to the indoor installation. Okay. This installation also includes a light installation. As the audience is led through the installation, there are different lights that are programmed to glow at different rates and colors and intensities. And can you see up above here, the very top there, the things that are moving? Those are the bespoke speakers that move the sound around. Okay. The drones are also programmed and flown by a team of engineers in a hidden control booth. And here is the little footage from the last room, so you can see the drone. Now, in between the 3rd gallery and the 4th gallery is where I was waiting for them. What I'm doing here is shaping the resonant frequencies of the space as feedback with non-semantic vowels and circular breathing. The megaphone allows me to throw my sound in different directions which creates a counterpoint of spatialization with the discrete sounds emanating from the drones surrounding the audience. When I place a small speaker with the sounds of the drones in my mouth, I'm performing a kind of electronic music technique called convolution, imbuing the frequency components of the recordings of the drones with the resonance of different vowel shapes in my mouth, like this. In this way, I become a vessel for the drone sounds in their desire towards the semantic. There was a period of research too, tests with drones, which were critical. We learned over several months of trials that each minute the drones sit idle, they lose 1% of operating power, a factor I had to consider in my composition. My score indicates when each drone would fly and at what height. There were networking and flight proximity issues as well that were also factored into the design of the piece. So this is in the gallery several months before, and we tested. Okay. 2 months before the installation in the museum, we built a fence cage to test the drones. During these tests, we realized that we had to account for the Faraday cage effect. We duly purchased twice as many network hubs than we originally planned. We also adjusted the placement of the network hubs in the galleries in the Asia Society. We also discovered a bug in the networking software, as the glitch only affected the drones when there was a certain number of drones being controlled together. The company did not account for that and deem it necessary to announce this glitch. But it cost us a lot of time to overcome this. In imagining new contexts for technology, art can be a valuable partner to tech industries. Creative adaptations of technology test the robustness of technology as well as invent new uses for it. This is the last prompt, right? What would I like you, the students, to take away from my talk today? I'm not here today to teach you how to sing like I do. We are surrounded every day by dark matter that invisibly and powerfully shapes us, tells us how we should live. Our habitus shapes what we should strive for, what we think we should become, and even what we think would make us happy. But that dark matter is defined by the dominant culture often, and it made me think when I was young and insecure about being American that it was my deficiency that I needed to find a cure for. It's like standards for beauty. Our culture constantly bombards us with images, propagandizes, instills in us that looking a certain way is more attractive and more desirable. But who gets to determine that standard, and what if you look different? What do you do then? How are you supposed to feel? My life was changed through a physical trauma. I had to rebuild my life after that accident, but what I realize now is how naive my plan A was. I know now at this age that no matter what I have accomplished, no matter how many medals I might wear on my uniform, or even if I were to win a Nobel, become a Nobel laureate, a certain segment of our country would still never treat me with respect. I have a lifetime of stories to attest to this fact. What a life in art has taught me is to be comfortable being me. That's what I needed to learn in art. Whenever I imagine a thing, a weird thing, and do it, even if it fails, I feel my agency and confidence grow from taking that risk. I learned to make my own space. Now, as an older person, I'm lucky to be entrusted with the capacity to help make space for others. This is my charge. at UC Berkeley. I am proud that our graduate student cohort and music composition in my department is more diverse in terms of background as well as practice than ever before. After the ontological turn, we can question continental Cartesian ontologies which used to be unquestioned as universals. In the Bantu language of South Africa, there's a word, Ubuntu, which stands for I am because you are. The Korean word uri stands for the connected self, the boundary demarcating the self, indicating an extended, embraced, integrated, connected self where I and you are chunked together. These are concepts for I that is foreign to the Western sense of the isolated self. These also belong to the category of epistemologies that Foucault calls subjugated knowledges, and the theorist Boaventura de Sousa Santos calls epistemologies of the South. The weird thing that I do is a species of noise that might also be categorized as subjugated knowledges. What I do is cast out from what is normatively considered music. Noise is a thing that is considered outside of the main signal, like me and how my 16-year-old self felt like. I felt like I was outside of the system. I didn't belong. Many times I still do. If you're going to take anything away from my talk today, please remember this. However weird you think you are, there's a space for you. And many times, the weirder you are, the more you can help shape change. You are a noise outside the signal, according to the economist and theorist Jacques Attali. Noise forecasts societal change. What the world needs more than ever are fresh perspectives on what can be considered beautiful. Question the invisible dark matter all around you. Ask who gets to decide, and why can't you decide for yourself? Why can't you sing the way your body was meant to? You don't have to conform to prescribed genres or ways of being. You can invent new genres. You can work together, not only to challenge the standards, but also change it, reframe it. It is training in the humanities that helped equip me to try to do this. The weirder you think I am, the more I represent hope, because as I am talking to you here, standing in front of you, I am lucky enough to be able to live from this weird thing that I do, and chances are that your shit is not as weird as my shit, so if I can live from mine, you can too. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for sharing with us about your work and your process, but also yourself and your history, and for validating weirdness. Very much appreciate that. So now we have a little less, we have around 5 or 6 minutes for questions. Let me see if there's any online first. Yes, there is. Let's start there. So what, if anything, do you expect the audience to experience, or what do you hope they experience when you perform person-specific music?
Yeah, there is not just one thing. I've experienced so many concerts that after the concert, people will come up to me and, were you thinking about this? And then I heard this, I felt this, I felt like it was like a movie, and then, you know. And I want to acknowledge that everybody perceives life, engages with sounds differently, and that's valid, you know. But maybe there is a purely sonic way to engage with what I do on a purely visceral level, And I think sounds communicate on that level. That's hypersemantic as well. And then we could also have conversations about what does this mean? Is this actually music? What are you actually trying to do? Do you have indigestion? And that's why you sound like that? Does it hurt? You know, these are all sorts of different kinds of questions. But my life was changed through a series of art engagements that confronted me with baggage, right? I thought art was supposed to be this way, life is supposed to be this way, sounds are supposed to be this way, and then you know, like reading E.E. Cummings for the first time. It doesn't rhyme. What's this? If la el o, a leaf falls, loneliness, and there's a big space on the bottom. Oh, he's using space and it's sculptural. You know, it's a whole other way of reading, and I hope there is at least a space of generosity and empathic, you know, exchange, right? That we could dialogue like that, and then I would like to ask all of us to at least kind of withhold, you know, your first instinct at judgment, and then we could practice through art confronting you to become more empathic citizens. Thank you.
Much for that answer. Okay, we have time for questions from in-person students. Okay, I saw a hand go up over there.
Hi, Professor. Thank you very much for speaking with us today. We really enjoyed your lecture. I was wondering, so as you mentioned, you said your music's very unique, and I'm sure like throughout your time you've faced criticism. So I was wondering, like, what are your strategies for dealing with criticism? Is it more confronting it head on? Is it just, I guess, passing it off, or how do you deal with that?
Yeah, actually, I appreciate criticism more. I think we can trust criticism more than easy compliments. Hey, that's great, man. You know, right? It's just there's a kind of disease of just superficial niceness in America, right? And it's different. When I engage with colleagues or audiences in Europe, they could be critical, and we could still have a beer, right? So I try to understand each person's perspective, and maybe there's an opportunity there to learn, right? But ultimately, it's my music, and I have to like it, I have to believe in it, and actually I have to keep having personal metrics that are much higher than anybody else outside can ever point to, hopefully, right? And then it's also, the horizon has to keep shifting too, because if you achieve more things or whatever, but like not neoliberal metrics, you know, like how many commissions did you get, but like artistic ambitions that become more like personal metrics. And then through that, over a lifetime, I've learned to accept myself more, like myself more, and that's where the confidence happens, and then no matter what anybody says, it doesn't matter.
That is all the time we have. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Dr. Ken.
Thank you. Thank you.